Welcome back to A Story to Tell from the campus of Dixie State University. This is Lane Rano, and we're talking with Shireen Ghorbani. Did I pronounce that right?
You sure did.
Well, Shireen, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. How are you doing?
Fantastic, and if I wasn't, I'd lie about it.
Oh, good.
My mother used to say, if you can't have anything else, you can have a positive attitude.
Well, that's the truth.
Well, what are you doing here?
So I am running for the United States House of Representatives in Utah's beautiful 2nd District, and that stretches from Farmington all the way down here to St. George, over to Kanab, into King County, up back to Wayne County, and then back up to Tooele County and into Salt Lake.
You're all over the state.
Yes, I am.
What prompted you to do this? Have you been examined by a psychiatrist?
Yes, they said I'm doing fine. Yes, I am a person who got into this race really because of a couple of events. But one day, it was August 19th, 2016, which was the day that I lost my mom to pancreatic cancer. She raised me largely by herself. She was an educator her whole life. And in the summer of 2016, we had to sit around our kitchen table, just like I know families do across this state and across this country, and we had to ask what we might have to do to get access to affordable health care. I was very lucky because she was 68. As a working person, she had paid into Medicare her whole life, and it was there for us when we needed it. So I came through that experience. I saw what was happening on the national stage, happening with my representative in particular, and I didn't see any solutions. I didn't see a clear focus on fixing healthcare in this country, and that's why I got into this race.
So what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, so my greatest desire is to reduce the cost and increase access. So there are many things that we could be doing to address the rising cost of healthcare. I was out at Rocky Vista Medical School just yesterday, speaking to one of the deans there and understanding just the incredible growth in the administrative burden in healthcare. It used to be one administrator for one doctor, and now we're up to almost 20 administrators for one doctor, for one physician. So the ballooning administrative costs in healthcare is something that I take very seriously. But more than that, I think there are a lot of simple solutions that we've not been able to see addressed with this Congress, or any, right? A really simple one that actually our president campaigned on was allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices at the federal level. This is something that many people see as a common sense solution, but we can't get our Congress to do anything about it.
Why won't they?
I would say you should look at who's writing them checks. When large pharmaceutical corporate PACs are writing thousands of dollars to our representatives, it makes sense that they would not vote against their interests.
Well, that's rude of them.
Isn't it?
What else is on the line?
In general or on healthcare?
Well, both.
Oh, sure. So I think it's an absolute travesty that we spend more than almost any other, we do spend more than any other industrialized nation on healthcare, and we leave 30 million Americans uninsured. That means, you know—
Who are they? Who's uninsured?
So it's a lot of working people in this country, a lot of working poor, people who are unable to pay the premiums that are going up every month. I talked to a family out in Tooele. Their monthly premium is $800 for a family of 4. And that is considered to be pretty good. Next year, or actually this fall, so in September, we're going to see those rates rise again. This is fundamentally what happens when, I believe, we allow insurers to be in charge of healthcare policy. If we brought doctors, if we brought nurses to the table, if we were really looking at what was best for everyday working people, I think we'd have a really different system.
What else besides healthcare?
Yeah, so I'm concerned that we have lost focus on everyday working Utahns. I'm out there talking, we've knocked on at this point, over 22,000 doors, speaking directly with voters. And what I hear is, there are a lot of—
Knocked on 22,000 doors?
Yeah. So me and my team have knocked on 22,000 doors. I personally have been out on hundreds of doorsteps, and that's in Davis County, Tooele County, Cedar City. We just started down here, so we're working down here as well, getting out and talking to people. And I'll tell you what, there are a lot of people in Utah that are they're doing better. I do think people are doing better, but they are not getting ahead, right? A lot of Utahns, a lot of Americans are getting by, but they're not getting ahead. So they're having troubles meeting things like paying their childcare, meeting these increasing demands on their healthcare costs. Being able to buy that first home even is out of reach for many people that I speak to. And that's a unifying issue. It's a unifying concern that I've heard from here in St. George all the way up to Farmington. I'll tell you that there's a lot that I think unites us. We've been given...
There's something that unites us?
I think there's a lot.
I'm waiting to hear this.
I think there's a lot. I have yet to stand on the doorstep of anyone here in this state that will tell me that we have healthcare figured out, or that affordable housing is not a serious concern, whether that's getting people into apartments at a reasonable rate or being able to buy their first home. And that's truly something that I have found as a concern from Utahns, from right here in St. George, over to Kanab, up to Boulder, and on up into Grantsville, Tooele. All of these communities understand that housing is a real concern. But for me, it's tied back to this idea of, are American workers the priority? Are American workers getting ahead in this economy? I had a great time out at Cornfest in Enterprise. Have you been up there?
Well, I've been to Enterprise
Have you been to Cornfest?
a couple of years ago.
Oh yeah, corn is good.
I eat corn. When I was a little kid, my twin brother and I raised corn, sold it in Pioche, Nevada.
Oh wow. Yes.
75 cents a dozen.
Oh, that's
It's a little more
fantastic.
expensive now.
Yeah, it is.
And that was
isn't it?
fresh right out of the field into their house.
Yes, that's when it's the best. So I was up at Cornfest talking to a farmer, a guy who he's got hay, and he said that he's really being negatively impacted by some of the things that are happening with this administration and with this government. So in particular, he has foreign buyers for his product that aren't coming to the table to buy his hay this year. They're not coming. So because of the tariffs, because of the increased strain on the economy, he's not seeing the same buyers. He also told me that they're expecting to see, he was talking with a rep from John Deere who said that they typically see about a 6% increase in cost, that this year they're certain it's going to be 9 or more. And that's based on the steel tariffs and other things that are hitting people. So I'm concerned that we have some things that are going on in our economy right now that are really being played out on the backs of working Americans, of our farmers, of people in ag.
When you're not campaigning, what do you do?
So I work full time. I was just granted political leave, which I'm very grateful for.
I didn't realize there was a political leave available.
Yes, so I am grateful to work at the University of Utah. Political leave is an option. It's unpaid, obviously.
What do you do there?
I do communications and training, and I work in facilities management. So my area is really planning, design, and construction at the University of Utah, where I do a lot of training, so bringing people together to make sure that we're doing our work in the very best way that we can. And then I also do communication and outreach to help campus know when we are building a new building or closing a road, or even things like communicating about snow removal and the way that we irrigate our campus.
Does it snow in Salt Lake?
It does.
How deep does it get?
Oh, it depends on the storm.
7 or 8 feet, huh?
Yeah.
I'm sorry I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. So I work full time up at the U. I am the board chair for the Rape Recovery Center in Salt Lake City. So for many years, I have worked on policy related to campus sexual assault and studied that. I have 2 master's degrees in organizational communication and policy. And I work now in the community as an advocate for people who are victimized by sexual violence.
Is there a lot of that going on?
Unfortunately, there is. A really unfortunate statistic about Utah is that we are low in terms of all other forms of violent crime. We're low in terms of homicides. We're low on all other forms of violent crime.
We got to work harder in getting those homicides up.
Definitely not. But we're high in sexual violence. And I am a person who's volunteered on a crisis line here, it was up in Salt Lake City, but that is a line that anyone can call into. Spent nights on that crisis line in answering those calls when people are in distress or feel like they've experienced something. It is a pervasive problem in our culture, and I'm really proud to be part of an organization that's helping people heal.
What causes that? What's the reason for
it? For sexual violence?
Being so high in Utah, or at the University of Utah?
So it's not just the University of Utah. We know that it's high on college campuses. We know that it's high in our community. We know that it's high in lots of different places. I would say this: we've gotten really bad at having good conversations about consent and healthy relationships. I used to teach gender and communication, and one of the things that I would say is we have to get better at talking about our relationships, about what we are willing to do or unwilling to do in our intimate relationships. And if we're unwilling to do that, we're going to continue to have these problems where people don't understand when lines have been crossed. Yeah, I'm really concerned about it, but it's something that I'm working to help help support an organization that does education and outreach, that helps change some ideas about consent, about talking about healthy relationships, and then is providing services to those who experience sexual violence.
Consent is something that's hard to determine sometimes.
Yeah.
There was a movie, he said, she said, or something like that. I don't think it had to do with consent for sex, but it's a horrible thing. Horrible thing.
It is. Yeah.
Horrible thing. What else?
Yeah, so I also am married. I have a husband that I love dearly. We got married in 2003 after meeting in college, and we served in the United States Peace Corps together.
Whereabouts?
In Moldova. It's the former Soviet Union.
Well, that must have been fun.
Yeah. You know, it was an experience that I am deeply grateful for. Service to this country is important to me. Being able to be out there on behalf of this country and to talk about how proud I am to be American was something that I really valued. It was a place where I really saw in clear focus what happens when a Russian government influences a sovereign nation. Moldova was a place that was absolutely under the thumb of the Russian government in many ways. And what I saw in that experience is that when people feel like their democracy is not controlled by that nation, by their own people, there's just a deep sense of corruption. And it's real. It's not a perception that people have. One of my favorite and most disheartening stories is to work at the anti-corruption office. You had to pay the secretary sitting at the front desk a $500 application fee that went into her pocket so you could apply to work in that office.
You're kidding.
No, that's the level of corruption, right? Then that festers and is paired with an intense sense of apathy. People feel like it doesn't matter what they do, it's not going to make a difference in their government. And I'll tell you, I'm very worried that we're headed there. I think there's a sense here in this country that our votes don't matter, that they're being influenced, right? So that exact attitude, I think, is something that I take very seriously, and it's one of the other reasons I'm running. I believe that we have to stand up and take care of our democracy, build strong alliances with our allies, and make sure that we're working to ensure that we aren't being corrupted by people with really deep pockets or by influence outside of our borders.
When you were over there, did you learn the language?
So I speak Romanian.
Romanian. Well,
Yeah.
that sounds romantic.
Yes. It is. It's a language that's part Romantic and part Slavic.
Romantic and Slavic.
Yeah.
What does your husband do?
So my husband worked in media for many years. He was he shot the news, and then he was an executive producer. And a few years ago, he got out of that and got into education.
Where was he then?
So he was at Channel 2, and now
Channel 2?
Yeah, in Salt
I've
Lake
heard of
City.
that.
And now he is at high school, Judge High School in Salt Lake, where he teaches freshman English.
That's where I got my start, at Channel 2.
Did you? What were you doing?
I started that out as a flunky in the newsroom
Oh,
and ended up as the producer of the News at 10 with Norris, Weldy, and James at KSL.
Yes, great. So, what are your thoughts on what's happening with the state of the media these days?
You don't want to know.
Well, you know what they say: democracy dies in darkness.
Well, turn on the lights.
That's what I think reporters do.
Do you have other family?
I'm an only child.
Lucky you.
Yeah,
Well, sort of.
sort of.
I had an identical twin brother, and we had a lot of fun. He passed away in 2010.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that.
What about the Lake Powell pipeline?
Yeah, so
Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. I'm concerned that this is a very, very expensive boondoggle that's going to be borne on the backs of the residents of Washington County. I'm very concerned that it's being built for water that may not be there.
It's not there now, is it?
It's not there now. It seems foolish to me to spend your taxpayer dollars, really millions of dollars, on a pipeline to pipe water that doesn't exist.
So instead of a pipeline, it's a pipe dream?
Yeah, it might be.
What about public lands?
Yeah, so I'm very concerned that if we move public lands out of public hands, that we're not going to have access to them anymore. I hear from people who recreate in those lands. I hear from ranchers that use those lands, from hunters that are concerned about what the state is really planning to do. One of the things that I have been doing is trying to get out and understand what really are the challenges. And I get it. It sounds like there have been a number of challenges around shared use, around making sure that the infrastructure is there on the lands when they need it. But if this conversation is about what's going to happen to the ranchers out there, I don't think that we can guarantee them that if we move a big chunk of these lands out of the monument status, that they're going to continue to be able to graze on those at the same rates that they currently are. So if it's not about protecting the grazers, if it's not about protecting the ranchers, what is this really about? And I think that we as Utahns deserve some honest answers about that.
Do you have the answers?
I don't, but I believe our representative does, and I'd like to hear him explain it.
Haven't you heard him?
So what I've heard is a very vague plan to put a national park in the center of Grand Staircase that would be significantly reduced in size, but that the management structures over that seem very unclear to me. Would it be a traditional national park in the way that we've thought of them? Do we have the funding and resources and support to do that? When I'm over in Escalante talking to people, I don't have a strong sense that they want a national park in that community, especially the ranchers. It's not what I'm hearing from them.
Why do you think they're pushing so hard for it?
I'm not sure who is pushing so hard for it. I think there's a lot of debate in the community, and I'd like to see some real leadership on bringing those voices together to build some consensus.
What about immigration?
Yeah.
That's a big question right now.
It's a big question right now. I am the daughter of an immigrant.
Where are you from?
So my father is from Iran. I'm half Persian, half Iranian American. And I'm very concerned about many things that are happening related to immigration in this country. I believe that what we have happening now is a result of a broken Congress that's unwilling to act. You saw this year there were a number of bills that came to the floor, and they were unable to pass any semblance of immigration reform. And I think that's because we have people in office that are more concerned about their reelection than they are about making tough decisions. I'm a person who certainly supports border security. I think we have to do that in a smart way. I also understand that we have to do something to address the millions of people who live here. How do we move them into the light? We can't continue to have people living in darkness. It doesn't serve them, it doesn't serve us.
What are the solutions?
Yeah, so in the short term, one of the things that I think there's great support for is to have a pathway to citizenship for our dreamers, right? So making sure that those DACA kids have a pathway, have a clear pathway. And we've asked them, I mean, they've done everything we've asked them to do. If they are law-abiding citizens here in this country, then that have never known another home, we should be able to find a solution to move them on a pathway to citizenship. I believe that's something that we should do. I think we have a moral obligation to stop separating families at our border. This has been stopped, but there continue to be about 500 families that are separated. That violates the very fabric of who we are as Americans. I think it's an absolute travesty that we pulled children away from parents coming across this border.
And did that start with Trump?
Yeah.
I thought it started with Obama.
No, so when, if you're talking about the children who were coming, so there was a period of time during the Obama administration when unaccompanied minors were being sent to our border. So that's different than what was happening just in this policy change. This was a policy decision by this president to separate children from their parents when they came across this border seeking amnesty. And that came out of Jeff Sessions, out of our Justice Department, saying, if you come to this country, we're going to do it. They were clear as day that they were going to do it. But what we know is that it's created immense trauma for these children who've been taken, and there continue to be over 500 children that have not been reunited with their families. That's a real problem for me, and I know that it's a problem for Utahns. We don't feel like this fits our values. This is an absolute violation of our values in family here in this state, and we have got to have a better solution.
What's your take on this investigation about the Russian meddling in the election?
Yeah, So I support, obviously, so there are a few different investigations going on. If we're talking about just the investigations into Russian interference in our elections, we know that multiple intelligence agencies, including the Senate Intel Committee, have said that there was Russian desire to influence and sway our elections in favor of Donald Trump. And Putin stood on stage with our president and said that exact thing. I'm concerned that the House Intel Committee has come to a very different conclusion. It makes me wonder if they have different information that all other intelligence agencies and the Senate Intel Committee did not see. It seems like there's.
What is that information?
That's what I'd like to know.
No one knows.
No one knows. But it's curious to me that we've got a big body of intelligence agencies and our Senate Intel Committee saying one thing, and the House Intelligence Committee saying something else.
Why not? They're confusion.
Yeah, it could be.
Are the Russians honest?
It's a big question. Depends on what, right?
Are we honest?
I try to be. I know that many individuals try to be. I think that we have done some things from an administrative level, so from our highest office lately, that suggests that we are not a trustworthy partner when it comes to negotiations or to staying true to our word.
What is that?
So a really recent example would be ripping up the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. By all external accounts, Iran was complying with that agreement. Whether you liked that agreement or not, whether you felt it fell short or not, is a different question. But were they complying with what we asked them to do? And so it's believed that they were, and we decided to rip that up. That feels like a very dangerous way to move forward. It shows that we are not serious about agreements when we get into them.
What about North Korea?
Yeah, I think that's another example where we're in a real boondoggle, right? So now Pompeo is not going to go back, apparently, to continue these negotiations. I feel very concerned about our overall national security. I think that we are in a place that is more chaotic and less safe than we were even just a year ago. And I'm concerned that we don't have strong leadership, strong, careful, and controlled leadership that is helping us maintain our standing in the global environment, and in fact is working to undermine it.
What specifically should be done?
So I would like to see a greater sense of priority around diplomacy and building and maintaining those relationships with our allies that have been strong for many years. I think when we go into meetings with our allies, throw tantrums, throw them under the bus, that we are fundamentally...
You're against tantrums?
Oh, no, you know what? I have a 3-year-old, so I'm pro tantrums.
Tell me about your three-year-old.
Yeah, so I have a son. He is 3.5. We have a lot of fun. He's really into X-Wings. We're really into Star Wars right now.
Does he have a device?
Do you mean like an X-Wing? Yes.
Star Wars, who's his favorite character?
Well, I mean, right now it's the X-Wing. But early on, he fell in love with BB-8.
How interesting. And he's your only child?
He's my only child so far.
You're an only child, but you're going to have more?
You know, I didn't ever think of myself as someone who would go into politics. I felt like what was happening in our nation was a moment that called for taking a bold move and standing up and offering Utahns an option, a different voice. And somebody who's not, certainly not a lifelong politician, haven't held office before. I've got a lot of professional experience in my background that I believe prepares me for this job. More than that, I'm a person who's interested in listening and working with people to build consensus to get our government back on track. I thought that we deserved an opportunity to vote for somebody who represented those values, that put first Utah workers, Utah families, and making sure that we were doing right by them. There was a period of time when I thought I might have a second child, and right now that feels really unmanageable with the decisions that I have made. Which are, I like to joke that I feel like I've maybe made better decisions, but I don't know that I've made one that feels more important.
Well, that sounds wonderful. Your parents,
Yeah.
tell me about them.
So my mom, as I mentioned earlier, was an educator. She taught English, high school English out in the West. She was born on a farm on the North Dakota-Montana border. One of 4 siblings. Went out, taught in Wyoming, taught in Montana, and this section of the world just wasn't quite wild enough for her. And so in 1978, she got on a plane and flew to Iran, where she taught in an American school in Tehran. And if you know your history, that wasn't a great time to decide to move to Iran. And so as revolution was breaking out in the country and in the streets, she met my father and they fell madly in love. She was evacuated out of the country ahead of the hostage crisis, ended up in Sweden. My father was able to meet her there. They got a visa, came back to the States and got married in the front room of that farmhouse that she grew up in out on the North Dakota-Montana border. My dad was a laborer. He worked in construction. He worked in a brick factory, but mostly he struggled with alcoholism. And so by the time I was 6, he left my family. He left me and my mom. And my mom raised me as a teacher in a private school. She was at a Catholic school. She made about $27,000 a year. It was the kind of household where we were pretty close to the edge. After, paying for tanks of gas and covering the bills to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. I also grew up without health care. The school that she worked for didn't offer health care. And I know there were many nights where she had to make tough decisions about taking me into a clinic to see if it's just a cold or an earache, or to know that she's going to be able to, pay that electric bill. But I learned a lot of good values there. Certainly fiscal responsibility is something that's very important to me, making sure that we are balancing our budgets and paying for those things that we can afford, and understanding that we have to sometimes make difficult decisions.
We have 1 minute left. What's your final word?
My final word is, what I am certain of, as I mentioned earlier, is that there is absolutely more that unites us than divides us. And if we can get together and have decent civil conversations with our neighbors, with those that we share our faith with those that we work with, we're going to get a lot further than we are if we continue to live in this fantasy that we're very divided.
Well, thanks, Shireen, for being with us on A Story to Tell.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's been my pleasure. This is Lane Ronald from the campus of Dixie State University. Thank you for being with us.